I do have a spiritual connection to the island. My kin are buried there. When I go there, I can feel their presence. This is where my ancestors came from, George Newton and his Maori wife, Whare Tutu. They had been living on Codfish Island, but they moved down here where Bishop Selwyn found them and married them, 6th of February 1844. They had been on Stewart Island for 17 years. During that time they had a family. One of this family, Mary Newton, became my great-grandmother. George Newton and his wife, Whare Tutu, are both buried here, so there is a cemetery here. The land was sold to the Crown in 1864 and they lost all rights.
Lord's River was a very, very special place for all our family. Harirua, our tipuna, was not in favour of selling Stewart Island, and if you look through the sale of Stewart Island you see where he took no money. He kept Horomamai and Wharetukuaitaha, known as Breaksea, as his Muttonbird Islands, and he took a reserve on that first beach, 30 acres. And he lived with the Paratas. He had 2 sisters. One was married to Cooper, and that was my great-great-grandmother.
Rakiura to me is virtually my tūranga waiwai, or tūraka waiwai. My great-grandfathers were born here and lived here all their times, and respectively each one married early Maori from the area. We've got very deep roots in this place. Our ancestors are buried on Codfish and other parts of Rakiura, and it's always been special to me.
For many years I was a fisherman around there, and it was always my pleasure to get ashore and walk on the place. Isn't the sun good? It's a jewel. There's not many places left in New Zealand where the bush is still there. The solitude. Solitude means a lot to a lot of people. You can get that there.
To survive on Rakiura from day one, you had to use the sea. The pathway around the island was the sea.
We've been coming up and down since we were big enough to get in the dinghy. And when you got bigger you had to row, because if you didn't row, you didn't go. We had a right to come up here and take kelp for pohas and get kai. We got turi, we call the blue mussel turi, and what you call tuatua we call ruros, and cockles, and oysters off and on. We always went fishing if it was a fine day, or went looking for shells if the tide was right, and you got a feed of powers, kinners, poo-poos, boo-boos we called them, and went home and boiled them up, but we only took so many, and then we'd share them out when we got to the island, things like that. I suppose years ago they'd get birds too. But at that point out here, going through the passage, there's muttonbirds all along that point on the mainland side.
Early Polynesian arrivals to the country would have come from the islands of the North Pacific. Migration of the great waka from Hawaii to New Zealand, and the earliest known one was Maori in 900, I think it was, that he came here.
He claimed the whole of the South Island. He called it the Waka of Maui. And to prevent his canoe from drifting away, he reached down into the water and pulled up a stone from the bottom of the sea, Stewart Island, attached a rope to it and put it back over, and that became Te Puka o Te Waka of Maui, meaning the anchor stone of Maui's canoe. Later it became known as Motunui, meaning a big island. Later on it became Rakiura because of Te Rakitamo. Te Rakitamo came down here looking for a wife, because his wife told him before she died to go to Motunui and marry a girl from there. But when he arrived there, lo and behold, she was already tapui, meaning she was already reserved for someone. And when he asked for a sister, it was the same thing. So he blushed deeply and he came away from there. But when the skies were red at sunset, the people used to look at it and say, oh, e te Rakiura te Rakitamo, meaning the blushing of Te Rakitamo, because he blushed very deeply. And it was shortened down to Rakiura. From archaeological surveys, they know that Stewart Island was inhabited around about 1300. Moa bones, all sorts of things have been discovered. But I think it's got to be guesswork as to who the people were. Because we had Waitaha here for a start, and then came the Karimamoi, Ngaitahu.
They all sort of intermarried, interrelated, and most of the descendants and owners of Rakiura, Maryland are from those marriages and integration of the different tribes of the area over those years.
Rakiura was a place of refuge for people fleeing from intertribal fighting and so forth until they regained enough strength to return to where they came from.
There's hardly a bay around this coast of Rakiura, east or west side, that I haven't come across remnants of occupation pre-European, whether it be middens or chisel on the beach or on the rocks or adze or something. And often you'd find where there'd been a slip and there'd be the remnants of a midden and stuff there. I think they were pretty transient. They would have probably moved in here, certainly for the titi, and then in other times of the year, through the summer months, they may have been chasing the eels up the rivers and probably gathering flax and bits and pieces. They certainly moved around.
And Albion Inlet in the early days was, there was a kike here where Maori lived. There's quite a flat behind there, and the flax you see planted there is a harikeki, and it came from Roebucky Island. It was the only place that they got it. They brought it from. It was a good place here. Cockles are available. There was always birds and things like that. Actually, it was quite a good place to have a kike. Sheltered in all weathers.
When they were negotiating the coast, they'd just go ashore at a suitable bay if the weather wasn't suitable to travel on and set up camp. And they'd build one of those whare rau's there in 2 or 3 hours.
They've got several names, also known as a whare porataka, which is a round house, and they're also known as a maimai whare rau. They were used as dwelling houses at one time and workhouses. Only the dwelling houses had the koraputa in the top with the hole for the fire. Any other building that wasn't used as a dwelling house was termed a wharau. They were good too, nice, warm. There was a lot of them here at one time. The little fire in the middle is what is known as a takawahi, and it's only there for warmth. It's only a small fire, and you place a few rocks around and keep the fire into it because there's such a lot of fern, dry fern, that's placed in there for the purpose of keeping off the mud. No cooking is done within these buildings. All cooking is done outside.
A tauwhare is an overhang of rock, and there's a clean, dry place underneath, used as accommodation. It was open at the front, and they all faced north, so that they would get the benefit of the sun. The sun would warm the rock, heat the rock above them, so that they had early electric blanket.
Solar powered.
Yeah, solar powered.
Probably the prominent strongholds of the early tangata whenua, where they used to haul ashore, were Putatara, which is East Raggedy, and there was a big pa there. Codfish Island, that was another area that they resided in and hauled ashore. Te Hapua, the gutter at Masons, that was quite a prominent settlement. The south end of the spit at the neck, they lived there for a number of years. Bravo Island, Native Island was another one. So the survival of the early settlers was mainly out of the sea, and the bird life on the land, relatively easy to get. The fact that it was an island, it was easier for them to manage, and they did manage the resource that was here too. They certainly looked after it. And of course the titi, even today, it's a major part of our lives. The next sort of influx of residents to the area would be the seamen off the sealing ships. Most of them married Maori women, and of course 1820s through to 1850s the sealing was in decline, And once the sealing was over, it wasn't long before the whaling era started. And of course, most of the whaling ships came from the old country, the States, France. There's all sorts of League of Nations on the ships crewing them. And conditions on the ships weren't up to much, and consequently a lot of the seamen jumped ship while they were in this area.
Married Maori women, mainly for their own protection. It was the woman who protected them from her own people.
And one of them was our ancestor, Yankee Smith. He jumped ship in 1860. If you dodged the authorities, I think it was about 3 months you could stay, but if you didn't, you'd be repatriated. You'd be shot home in the first opportunity and also jailed. And there's a cave at the neck. You can go into it low water, and that's where the Maori families and European used to hide these seamen that had jumped ship.
We're here at Whenuaho, Codfish Island. You can see over there the popo that I carved. I named it Hinaketi, girl with the basket. She's standing where the first half-caste settlement in New Zealand was. Maori girls married to Pākehā seamen. And there's quite a village there, right round there. It's the most sheltered place on the island, where you've got a good view out too of any approaching vessels. The marriages here took place, although they'd been with their partners for years and years. The first marriages took place here on the 7th of February 1844. It was conducted by Bishop Selwyn. That's who we descend from. Nearly all Maori that live in Bluff and on Stewart Island.
About the 1850s, codfish was almost vacated and they moved down the eastern coast of Rakiura, mainly Bungaree, Murray River, Mamaku Point, Maori Beach and those places. A lot of those places I found middens where banks have fallen away over there. So they would have been scattered all along that coast, and eventually most of them would have ended up at the neck.
But there was quite a big population on the neck alone, around about 250 people living there. When the neck was populated, people would say, "How do you survive here?" And that was the answer they would get. Ahia tā mimiti, whakarātau te tepu. When the tide is out, the table is laid. And that was how those people lived, because in those days they were absolutely isolated and they relied on the foreshore for their survival. All the houses were dotted round the coast, and the bush had been cleared, and they had gardens behind the houses.
And they resided there till about 1915, is when the school closed, because most of the people were moving away. And of course they'd crossed the straits to Haraka, Aparima and Wakapatu and Waikawa, Bluff, Invercargill all round, and Rakiura into Half Moon Bay here, some of them. There's nothing there now. Families moved away, died out. I've listed 13 cemeteries on the neck, which were sacred to the people, and still are. All those cemeteries were just above the shore. The biggest one there now, I would say, is the Joss's one.
We thought times were hard when we look back, but we didn't know any other way. But then when you look further back, things were harder still for the older ones ahead of us. Mm-hmm. And even my grandmother used to have to go fishing after my grandfather was drowned. She was left with a young family. She'd take them, send them to school at the neck and row a boat out around Bench Island and fish all day and come back to Manning's Bay.